Chloe, who I know you've gotten to know, like same network, like at that time, like do you feel like to pull someone over afterwards and say like, listen, there's more to this, or here's what I see?
Absolutely. And, I did it very often on the show that was focused more on celebrities out of respect for their public image. But on the show, the new show I did, Life After Death, I do it even for regular people, right? There's certain things that come through that maybe are a little too personal or might put someone in a position that I don't want them in. So I like to share that information in a way that's private with good intentions so that they know it's just for them. And very often it's those things that are the most validating and the most personal, but I try to honor their privacy.
Now that makes a lot of sense. Now we see on Life After Death, we see your method is there's always a pen, there's always a pad. We see this is your method. Walk me through that. Like when did that start? And that's, I imagine like that's a requirement. Like if I said you need to read someone and you can't have a pad or a pen.
I'll tell you this, it isn't a requirement, but it strongly helps. And by that, I mean this, the scribbling started for me as a teenager when I was actually on the phone with a girlfriend one day and I was doodling and we were doing the homework and talking about the day. And I found that as I was doodling, I was actually having a hard time concentrating on what she was saying. And instead kind of was like daydreaming every time I just kind of started doodling to the point where I just started focusing on the doodles. And I realized very quickly that something about that process of just letting your mind wander, letting your hand wander, it helped facilitate that necessary mindset to do readings. So if anything, the scribbling process is more about the act of scribbling than it really is anything significant that gets written on the page or the scribbles themselves. They look cool, but it's really the process that acts as kind of a necessary shift that turns the process on so that when I'm not scribbling, I can kind of shut it off. Technically, I can do readings without scribbling, but it helps. And it's definitely kind of like my crutch so that I can maintain some normalcy in my day-to-day life.
That makes sense. And look, no one's going to want you not to give them the best reading, right? So
there you go, right? So that's why the notepad, it really does help.
Scribble away. What happens? I mean, I'm just so curious. And I think that's the reason why this show is trending on the top of the Netflix charts. Like, it's just, people are just so curious. Like, what happens to you? I mean, do you have like an out of body experience? Is Tyler present? Like, do you see things? I mean, what happens?
Absolutely. I always say my sixth sense uses the other five senses to communicate. So I don't see dead people walking around. It's not, like a state of constant terror. If anything, I've kind of trained myself to actively daydream, to get into a state of meditation where I'm hyper aware of the subtle impressions, the subtle changes that happen in my mind and my body. And so sometimes that will come through as a feeling of a memory that is not mine, but feels like mine. Sometimes I'll get a feeling of almost like a song being stuck in my head, but it might be a phrase or it might be a sentiment. There's even times where I'll get physical sensations that correspond with how somebody died. And that's kind of my cue to kind of get an indicator of where I'm supposed to kind of focus. But I kind of liken it to, in a reading, my body is like a canvas, and whoever comes through kind of paints the picture with my senses of what they want to convey about their lives, their death. And it is very interpretational. So, I'm not seeing dead people walking around. I wish it were that clear cut, but maybe I don't equally. It would also present a lot of challenges.
And then what happens? We've all seen the sweating, is that good? Like the more you sweat, that means something's happening here.
Sweating is a great sign. I used to hate it for the sake of being on camera because you know what it's like, but at this point I've embraced it as far as that goes. It typically is an indicator that something's happening, that physical impressions are starting to come through. Typically those are the strongest, meaning that physical sensations that correspond with how somebody died are usually the most overwhelming or primary focus of a reading. When that happens, it means that I have a relatively clear connection, and it means that likely the accuracy of the reading will be kind of continual and consistent and pretty good. If I'm not sweating, it means I'm just kind of trying my best to get to that place.
And then what happens? I mean, we see on the show often, the person, I guess, that they really want to come through comes through. But what happens, like if someone comes to you for a reading and someone else comes through, it's a valid reading, like it's a true person in their life. Does that happen a lot? I mean, like where like, okay, someone wants their mother and it's their second cousin's best friend.
happens all the time. And I really am of the philosophy that people hear who they need to hear from versus maybe who they want to hear from. There are certain factors that cause certain people to come through versus others. Sometimes the strength of the communication on the person coming through's end can influence things. But yeah, I always kind of have this joke of, you might want to hear from your mother and you might end up hearing from your mother-in-law, and that's okay. But, I definitely as a medium have no control over who or what comes through.
And you feel like there's usually a reason, like whoever comes through, there's some reason.
Yes.
Why?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Typically, people come to a reading wanting some degree of clarity. My goal is just to leave people with validation, with some sense of confidence that, what, in leaving this experience, I can move maybe a little more clearly in this direction of my life, or with the knowingness that I'm not alone. But different people need different things for sure.
Do you see one theme that people need the most? I mean, other than the obvious, you want to know that your loved ones are okay.
I would say when I think about the bulk of the people that contact me for readings, so many people, even with loved ones who died under the best of circumstances, have regret. So many people come to me because either something went unsaid or undone. And that knowingness has changed how I live my life. And I think speaks to the importance of validating our loved ones in the here and the now, those who are still with us, picking up the phone, checking up on these people, contacting and connecting with those that mean something to us, because so often, life happens and things go a different direction. And I think we can minimize the degree of regret that we have in the future by saying it now, by communicating now, by not going to bed angry, and just making sure those you love are on the same page with you.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine no matter what you did during the person's life, everyone, I mean, I've experienced it in my own life with people that are no longer here. Like no matter what, you just have regret.
Exactly. Even under the best of circumstances. So I think we can live accordingly with that in mind.
That makes a lot of sense. What about, have you ever, look, certain people die because they're not good people. Like they, were criminals or whatever. Do you ever get a sense when you're reading someone, does that come across like, oh, wait, this person's here for a reason, but I get a sense they were a bad person? And is that really your job to even bring that up, or not really? It's just delivering who's coming through for that reading.
That's a great way to even ask that question. Absolutely. I've learned through this process to try to not judge the people that I bring through, and to try to not judge the people I'm reading. I've read great people and brought through great people. And I've read people who, unfortunately did do some tough things, and same with people who came through on the other side. What I can say is my job has taught me that we have a lot more in common than we have different. It's given me a compassion for people, no matter where they're at in their life, or whatever that looks like. But I really think it speaks to one of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes, which is, being that I'm human, nothing human is foreign to me. And I love that quote because it really encompasses this work. I see so many stories, so many faces, so many lives and deaths, and really we have a lot more in common than we have different.
That makes a lot of sense too. So how did Life or Death come about for you? How did the show come about? And, who brought up this idea of, we're not going to read Khloe Kardashian or Snooki anymore. We're going to read actual people that are on the 300,000 waiting lists that you have.
Well, I was so happy to be able to do this show because it's the show I wanted to do from the very beginning. It was a stipulation as I went with the E-Network originally that it needed to be in some way focused on celebrities. And so while I was very thankful for that platform, that definitely was out of my wheelhouse. It wasn't something that was kind of natural for me. Whereas reading everyday people, I consider myself a regular guy. That's really where my passion lies, in being able to bring assistance to people where there's a genuine need. And it's not to say that celebrities don't have needs, but reading regular people has really, to me, been where my passion can shine, where my ability has the most effectiveness in being able to reach people who might not be able to come to LA, or might just have these extraordinary testaments of loss and resilience, and can really use that platform to share their story.
And I mean, let's face it, the average person who's watching Netflix and watching the show is not a celebrity. I'm sure lots of celebrities watch, but it really makes, I think, the general masses of the world feel like I could be getting a reading from Tyler.
Absolutely. And that's the goal. And that's one of the beautiful things too, is I think there's messages in every reading that other people can take away. Even if you're not sitting in that chair receiving that experience, I think when you see other people's loved ones validate where they're at in their life, or maybe how they lived or how they died, I think people can take that as an opportunity to apply that to their loved ones, to know that there's still some connection.
Do you get, we see this in this show too, like, you know, where you're involved in this, where you're like, maybe this was a hit and run. Do you get a lot of requests from people like, you know, police and like authorities to be involved